basically the take-home points, what you are expected to know at the end of this session is to have a good understanding of why ethics is important in biomedical and behavioral research. And then there are so many theories about ethics or on ethics, but I chose to communicate the principlism theory. And with the principlism theory, you will get to understand that there are just 4 principles. And so when you are putting your proposal together, it is easier to check or cross-check whatever you have written against those 4 principles than to say, is it Kantian theory or whatever. So I have left out all those theories. And the reason why, like I said, it's easier, and you get to understand that ethics has its roots in philosophy. But we are not going into philosophy. I'm going to make this as basic as possible. And the main goal at the end of it all is that by the time every participant writes a proposal, hopefully it should be a flawless proposal. And so that is the 3rd principle, that is the knowledge that you are going to acquire from this session. We expect you to be able to apply it to issues in your research. And so, like I said, as part of it, I said that ethics is a branch of philosophy. And when you are talking about philosophy and you are talking about ethics, the basic thing that ethics looks at with regards or in relation to your research participants is to see whether you are treating your research participants fairly. And so we are talking basically about morals. Is it morally right to treat my research participant this way? Yes, I need a degree. I want to, whether it's a BSc or a master's or a PhD, your degree is important. But you know, before you can have that degree, you need to work with human beings as research participants. And those research participants must be treated fairly. You treat them like human beings. You're not just looking at them as objects that are necessary in obtaining your degree. And so that's what we mean by you are looking at how it relates. So we are looking at how it relates to other people. There is no, even people who are in the arts, there is some degree of communication with humans, not to talk of biomedical or behavioral research. And then, so I'm leaving, please, next slide, leave all those other definitions. Next slide, please. Yes. And so when we are talking about ethics, basically, you will find that from the literature, there are 2 types, ethics of aspiration and ethics of obligation. That you are in school to obtain a degree, that comes under ethics of aspiration, which I am not here to discuss or to teach. I'm aspiring to be a BSc holder, to be an MSc holder, to be a PhD holder, or I'm even done with academics. I want to go into the realm of grant seeking, and that is ethics of aspiration. But we are talking about ethics of obligation. That is your obligation as a researcher to your research participants. And so whatever you are going to put in your proposal, there are some questions that you need to ask yourself. This thing that I have written, is it right? Is it right? And that's what we mean by the study of morals. What should I do to my research participants? What should I not do to my research participants? This aspect of my research, assuming I am a research participant, will I want a researcher to treat me that way? So those are thoughts and questions that go into your proposal when you are putting them together. And those are the things that the ethics committee will look at. We'll look at those ethical principles and we'll look at your research design. And let me quickly say at this point that if your research design is sound, then you will discover that all ethical principles will be fulfilled. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Yes. I will just say one story without necessarily going into too much details, because you may be asking yourself that, what is all this fuss about ethics? For many years, people were not bothered about ethics, but a few things happened. Some of us will have read, some of us who have literary minds will have read about World War II, how the prisoners that were captured then were handled. You have heard about what we refer to as the Tuskegee study in US, where the Africans that had syphilis, that contracted syphilis, were kept in a house, and people were just studying the progression of syphilis. And are we saying that generation of knowledge is wrong? No, it is not wrong to generate knowledge. But what we are saying is that the means that you take in generating knowledge, that is what is important. Because what those people did was to lock those people up in a house, and they told them that if you were to be in Africa, you won't have treatment. You will not receive treatment, any form of treatment for this syphilis that you have. And so today, if I open any textbook, I will see what primary syphilis is, what secondary syphilis is, what tertiary syphilis is. But those knowledge were generated at the expense of some people's lives. And back at home in Nigeria, a few of us will remember in 1996, those of us who were, those of us who were old enough then, when Pfizer was conducting a trial in Kano, and they just gathered children with meningitis. As at the time they gathered those children with meningitis, we had discovered, or science had discovered, that meningitis will respond to ceftriaxone. And instead of treating them with the full dose of ceftriaxone, they were testing a substandard dose. And it's another long story. And so those are things that happen to research participants, just all under the guise of us researchers, or of we researchers, trying to generate research, trying to generate knowledge. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Thank you. And so there are many reports depending on what you will do, and or what you want to do, whether it is about medical research, whether it is behavioral research. And if you go online, you will see so many of those research, of so many of those guidelines that you can use and you can consult, just to ensure that your research participants are being treated fairly. And we will talk about some of the principles in some of those guidelines. Next slide, please, because I want to allow room for question. Yes. So I said that I'm going to discuss about the ethical principles, and that I'll talk about the principlism theory, that is very easy to remember. All you need to do is just put down the 4 principles and ask yourself, this proposal that I have written, have I fulfilled autonomy? The first one is autonomy. Another word that you will find in literature that is used, that is sorry about that. Another word that is used, as a synonym for autonomy, is respect for persons. And so what we are saying is that I should, as a researcher, I should respect my research participants. The other one, the next one, the second principle is beneficence. The third principle is non-maleficence. And the fourth one is justice. And so, like I said, if you just write down those 4 principles, when you put your proposal together, you begin to tick and say, have I addressed autonomy in this proposal? Is there any form of beneficence? No, back to that slide, please. Is there any form of beneficence in that? What harm am I doing to my research participants? That is non-maleficence. And then justice, the recruitment, my research participants, have I treated them fairly? That is what justice is. And for those of us who want to read more on these principles, that's why I have included these 2 textbooks, in case you want to read more. Next slide. Let's go on to autonomy. Next slide, please. Thank you very much. So when we are talking about, no, the Meji, please, that's the previous slide. The class that I'm taking, thank you very much. So when we are talking about autonomy or respect for persons, this is where I'm going to spend most of the time, because this is the backbone of what everybody refers to as informed consent. People will say, oh, I've obtained informed consent, I've obtained informed consent. We really need to know what is an informed consent. because that word, that adjective, informed, is really, really important. And so when you are talking under the principle of respect for persons, which you have also said is autonomy. Autonomy means that your research person, just this English now, autonomy means your research person is an autonomous person. And when you are talking about autonomy, what that means is that that person is capable of taking his or her own independent decision. That's what autonomy means, without any interference, without any influence. That's what it means, autonomy. I've taken my decision. I'm going to Lagos now. That is my decision. Nobody should try to influence it. I want to enroll as your research participant. So be it. I don't want to enroll as your research participant. Then you leave me and let me go. That's what we are talking about. And so we are saying that the person can take a decision, an independent decision. And that brings us to the laws of the land, or will I say global laws. An independent person is assumed to be an adult. And adulthood starts from 18 years. And so what we are saying is that a research participant that is 18 years and above, please note my choice of words, and a research participant or a potential research participant that is 18 years and above is old enough to take a decision as to whether to enroll in your research or not. That is on the basis of age. And so everybody that is 18 and above can take their decision. What happens to those who are younger than 18? For those who are younger than 18, you break that down into another two groups. We know that very early in life, the toddlers and the likes of them, they are very young, they don't really understand concepts. But what we say in ethics is that for people who are between 7 years and 17, please note it, 18 is the dividing line. 18 and above, they are old enough to take their own decision. And so those ones are capable of giving informed consent. For those of them that are 7 years to 17 years, because their mental capacity is not well developed, what you are expected to obtain from children research participants aged 7 to 17 years is assent. And so the child, once a child is 7, minimum of 7, should be able to say no or yes, even though he or she does not understand the full import of your research. But that child has to say yes, and the parents will say yes before you enroll them. If the parents say yes and the child says no, under ethics, that child should not be recruited. Let me say that again. The dividing line, we are talking about normal human being, because we're going to talk about some other dimensions to it. The dividing line is 18 years. 18 and above, they are old enough to give their own view about your research, no or yes. So they give informed consent. Children who are 7 to 17 years, they must give an assent before their parents give consent. But for children who are 0 to 6, the parents will just give consent for them. So you've seen 3 groups in normal people. I hope I am communicating. Like I said, I'll try and finish early so that you can have time for questions. And so there are people, they are capable of taking their own decision, and their choices should be respected. And so this network keeps fluctuating. So for those of them who are 7 to 17, those who will give assent before their parents give consent, we expect you to impute into your proposals measures that can protect them. And why are those measures important? We have found out in ethics that when it comes to children as participants, especially if monetary reward is involved, every parent wants his or her child to be enrolled because of the money they will make from it. And that is why you need to protect them. However, on the other hand, it is possible for an individual to be 18 and above and yet not be independent. And those are people Those, for example, let's take, for example, prisoners. Yes, they are old enough, but by virtue of their circumstances, they are under the control, the rules, the regulations of the prison authorities, including the warders. If you want to recruit anybody in the prison, the prisoner doesn't have a say. It doesn't. Once the prison warder, that one says yes, you go ahead. And so when you have people who are not in a position to take a decision on their own, we refer to them as vulnerable population. And who are these vulnerable population? I talked about children earlier on. I have talked about prisoners now. Apart from those ones, women are also constitute a vulnerable population. In many countries, including Nigeria, a woman cannot consent to enrolling as a research participant without obtaining permission from the husband. And then pregnant women, more importantly, they also constitute a vulnerable population. Non-English speaking participants are also vulnerable, because what it means is that your questionnaire will have to be interpreted to them. And in the course of interpreting it, you may lose some of the meanings. And that is why when you are conducting a study in non-English people, what ethics requires is that the questionnaire should be translated into the language, the common language in that community, and translated backwards. And so you're talking about back-to-back translation, just to be sure that the same information in English language is being communicated to them. But by and large, anybody who is not free, regardless of age, to take a decision on his or her own, constitutes a vulnerable population. And once they are vulnerable, we expect you as a researcher to protect them. A third group that I want to talk about is what we call, still on these two, based on that division into 18 and above and 17 below, we use the word major and minor, or major and minor. So the majors can take their decision, the minor. But there is a group that we call matured minor. They constitute the third group. And that is a group, you are working among teenage, maybe you are doing something on teenage pregnancy or working on teenage parents. The teenagers themselves, maybe 16, 17, by virtue of minor and major, they are not old enough. If you just look at the laws of the land, they are not old enough to consent to your research. But here they are, they themselves have a child, or they have children, that if you want to recruit those children as research participants, they are the ones who will give consent for that patient, for that child. And so when you put the totality of what is on this slide together, you can identify three groups. We are talking about minor, we are talking about matured minor, and we are talking about the major. Matured minors are people who are younger than 18, but by the reason of their circumstances, because they themselves are parents, you allow them to give consent. They are the matured minors. So from that, in any research, whether biomedical or behavioral, you work with one of those three groups, and you need to address them appropriately. Next slide, please. Yes. So I said that informed consent, that is what everybody concentrates on. Yes, it is important, and we have started with the age or the respect for person. But the information that you give your research participants, please don't withhold information from your research participants, especially for those of us who will engage in therapeutic studies, or you are doing a drug trial. Don't withhold information. Give them all the information that there is to know about that drug that you are testing. For example, you are working on HIV and you have this drug that you are testing. Don't let people assume that the drug is effective against HIV. Let them know it's a trial drug. And why are we saying this? What we have in the literature now is that people who are enrolled into such trials, they think they are protected. And before you know what is happening, the zero converts from HIV negative to HIV positive. And so every information possible you should give to your research participant. And we were talking about people who are independent, capable of giving their own giving a response to whether they want to be a part of research, of your research or not. There is a concept called coercion. Coercion may not be common in the sciences or the social sciences, but in the biomedical, coercion is important. I mean, coercion is very, very rampant. And what coercion means is that if you don't enroll, then I will not treat you. In the behavioral sciences, the man says, I don't want to enroll in your study, you let him go. But it's common on this side. And what coercion means is that if you don't enroll as a trial participant or as a research participant, nobody will handle you, nobody will manage you in this case. That is what coercion means. The other one that is important, and I alluded to it earlier on, is what we call undue inducement. Undue inducement has its root in the reward, payment, and everything that goes into research. I'm not going into payment for research, but where we are in Africa and in Nigeria today is that basically what we do is to just compensate our research participants. You can imagine with the economy of Nigeria, if you are conducting a study and you are paying 10,000 naira per participant, especially in children, you can be sure every father, every mother, they want all their children to enroll or for you to enroll them. And that's the sort of thing that we are talking about. And so what is that remuneration? What is that incentive that you are giving to your research participants? If that incentive, if that reward, if that compensation is sufficient to make a man who earlier said no to your research to now turn around to say yes, then that constitutes an undue inducement. That means it is that offer that has changed his or her orientation. And so when you are enrolling your research participants, whatever you want to offer them, whatever you are offering them, whether it's towel, bucket, or whatever, it is the last thing to be mentioned. You will have given all other informations and ask the person, do you want to enroll? You understand? But if you start by saying, well, for enrolling in this study, every time you come here, is 10,000 naira will pay. The man or the woman will not listen to any other explanation. That amount of money, as small as it is, will cloud the person's sense of judgment. And what we are saying is that anything that will becloud the sense of judgment of any participant constitutes undue inducement. And please don't tell lies. Don't let them know that it is a research. Let them know you are enrolling them into a research. Don't give the impression that you are treating them. Don't give them any other impression. Let them know exactly what the study is all about. Next slide, please. So informed consent is a process. Informed consent is a process. And in this process, a researcher is expected to give all the information, as we said earlier. When you have given the potential research participant all the information, you allow that potential research participant to ask questions. You will also ask the potential participant questions just to be sure that that person understands that he or she is in a research. It is until you get to that level that you have given all the information. The potential research participant has been given the opportunity to ask questions, and you have also asked questions to test the person's knowledge. It is then that you say, I'm obtaining informed consent. And that's why I said the word informed is important. If you withhold any information from that participant, that means that is the whole information is not available to that participant. Whatever decision that person is taking is not informed. So the decision must be taken based on the information given to the potential participant. And it is after that you can say, I'm obtaining informed consent. And please, let me say this now. Verbal informed consent is no longer acceptable in the research world. It must be written. And when you have people who are not literate, you bring your form and they thumbprint. Don't write in your proposal to say, I'm going to take a verbal informed consent. There is no verbal informed consent is no longer acceptable. Next slide, please. Next slide.
Okay.
Move on to the next slide. I'm mindful of time. I'm mindful of time. Yes.
Yes, I've moved, ma.
Okay, move on. I've said all that there is to say about all these ones. Please just go on to benefit. Okay, stop at community agreements, because some people may go into the community. Your study may be population based, people in demography and the likes of it, that go into the community to collect data. What I had described earlier on is a one-on-one data collection. What happens if I'm working in a whole community? When you are working in a whole community, you need to understand the laws, the rules of that community. And when they say community, it's not I'm not talking about OAU community, where, yes, we call it OAU community, but everybody to himself. No, a community that has a leader. And in those communities, when you are working in such communities, the starting point is for you to identify the people that we refer to as gatekeepers, the elders, the decision makers. They are the ones that you will talk to first. They are the ones who will now take you to the KBAC of the place. You understand? You don't just walk to members of the community. No, you must get adequate information about the culture in that land. And so you need the permission of the gatekeepers. You walk to the KBAC, and if the KBAC says no, the KBAC has the overall say in terms of that community. If they say no, you cannot come into our community, then please, no, it is no. If they say no, don't try to sidetrack the members of the community, because if you do that, you make life difficult for those people. You will collect your data, you will leave. They will be the ones left behind to face the consequences. And so working within the community, you must align with the rules and regulations guiding that community. And if the KBAC says, yes, you can enter our community to collect your data, if the individual person now says, yes, KBAC has given the approval, because it's approval, permission, that's what KBAC is giving, the individuals in the community now needs to give informed consent. So if KBAC gives approval for you to enter the community, and the participants or the people in the community says, no, I don't want to be part of your study, the principle of autonomy says you must respect that decision. You will leave that person and source for another participant. And I said something that you must understand the culture of the land before you enter any community. And so all that is expected of you, I'm sure some communities, they will ask you to bring cola. You understand? You get to understand what the culture is, the things that are expected of you before you can make entry into the community. So please don't jeopardize the life and the interest of your potential research participants if you are working in a community. And then if you're also working in a community, the extent that you go depends on the nature of your community, of your research, and whether you have funders or not. But what we say normally in ethics is that when you are doing a community work, a community research, by the time you are done in that community, there should be something, a memorial of your visit to that community, something that you will leave behind in that community, that every time they see it, they will link it, they will trace it back to you to say that once upon a time, a researcher came here and did this for us. Thank you. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Next slide.
It's going all right.
Okay. No, beneficence is before this. Yes, beneficence. Yes, that's the first one. So I said we are going to just talk about 4 principles. So you have seen what respect for persons or autonomy is. The second principle is beneficence. And what beneficence in a layman's language, what it means is that every research participant, you must do good to your research participants. That is what it means. And so when you are putting your proposal together, it is not every proposal that should come and you say there is no direct benefit for the research participants. Can you think of something to do for them? even if it is simple health education that you can give them, something that they can benefit from. But what we see here is that people submit their proposal, and when they get to benefits to research participants, they'll say no direct benefit. Please think of something good that you can do for them. And so that is what it means. And when we are asking questions, yes, this now comes to the realm of the behavioral, the social sciences, the in-depth interviews and every other thing. That question that you want to ask, is it really, really important to this study? Is it really, really important? Because, beneficence and non-maleficence, they are the opposite of each other. They are the opposite of each other. Beneficence says do good to your research participants. You understand? Your research must benefit the individual. Your research must benefit this. It's not just the society. It's not just for you to write, obtain your degree, or write and publish your paper. No, the research participants must benefit. And this benefit is not necessarily money, it's not necessarily lunch, not necessarily transportation. You understand? And this will lead us to non-maleficence that says do no harm. There are some questions that you can have in your questionnaire that when you are asking your research participants, some of them can burst into tears, especially for those of us who will be working on intimate partner violence and the types of the likes of it. When you ask them to recollect some experiences, some of those experiences can be emotionally traumatic for them. And so you need to ask yourself, must I ask this question? Must I ask this question? Must I ask this question? Anything that will constitute a form of risk which comes under non-maleficence, we expect you to do away with it. But then, non-maleficence, please, go on to non-maleficence. Next slide. Yes, non-maleficence. Yes. And so, non-maleficence, like I said, means do no harm. Normally,
Hello, ma. Hello, ma. Are you able to hear us, ma?
what was the last word that you had? What was the last word? I don't know why the network is fluctuating like this morning. So I was saying that I was using the example of school children, those of them that stand by the roadside at the mercy of whoever will give them a ride, compared to those of them who their parents take them to school. Of course, the ones whose parents take them to school, they are exposed to almost no risk. And so if you are recruiting such participants, you see that the risk that they are exposed to on daily basis differs. And we are saying the risk of your study must not be more than the risk that each person is exposed to on daily basis. You are working on adults, for example, and you know that in that organization, the policy is nobody should become pregnant, no female staff should become pregnant within the first 2 years of employment. Of course, that tells you that for your research participants, you must not recruit anybody whose employment is less than 2 years. Because by the time you do it and you accidentally discover that 1 or 2 of them are pregnant, that person will lose his or her job. That person will lose his or her job. And so that's the sort of thing we are saying. Look at your study. What is the harm? We cannot totally abolish it, but then it should not be a harm that will jeopardize the life of people. And why did I say there is no study without a risk? Even if it is 10 minutes of their time that you are taking to administer your questionnaire, that is a form of harm. Because that 10 minutes, the 10 minutes, they could have used it, or they could have used it for something else. I am a student. You walk into my room and you want to administer question. The 30 minutes, I can use it to prepare my lunch. But because you're asking me a question, or you are administering your questionnaire, I have to leave my work and concentrate on you. So that is what we are saying. And that's why we say there is no study without a risk. But the risk must not be more. You don't go to somebody's room and for 3 hours, you continue to engage the person in question. The last principle, justice. Next slide, Dimeji, please.
It's moved, man. Risk associated with the study and its process.
No, just go to justice, because I want to take some questions. I think there are some questions, at least there's something in the chat already. So go to justice. Are you there now?
It's on justice. Yes, ma, it's on justice now.
Okay. So with justice, what does justice mean? Of course, it's not a court of law. Justice has to do with your research participants, your inclusion and exclusion criteria. That is the way I can summarize it for a class that I'm teaching online, and it is just for 1 hour, and we are taking the whole of ethics within 45 minutes to 1 hour. Your research must be responsive to the need of that individual or the need of that community. What do I mean by that? Earlier on, when we were talking about vulnerable population, I cited the example of prisoners. And I say, no matter how old they are, once they are there, you need your research participants. If you talk nicely to the warders, all they do is they just instruct those warders or those prisoners to come out. And the question is, this study that you want to conduct, is it of any benefit to a prisoner? Or did you decide to use prisoners just because you know that within 1 week, even if it is 1,000 research participants that you need, you can easily get them? That is what we are saying. So the inclusion criteria of your study must address the need of your study population. Don't just recruit people, or don't just recruit participants because they are available. They're not that. That is not it. Because if you test your drug, you use them. For example, we know skin infections, for example, is common among prisoners. If you want to test a drug that takes care of scabies or any other skin infection, and you say you are recruiting prisoners, it's understandable. But you want to look at, you have maybe a drug that is testing diabetes or hypertension, and because the prisoners are there, you now want to go to them. The question is, are the prisoners hypertensive? No. So that means by the time you have a result, an outcome of your study, the people you have used as research participants will not benefit from it. And that's where this phrase that says you should not use your research participants as guinea pigs, that's where it comes from. Don't use anybody that cannot or will never benefit from your study outcome. And so that addresses inclusion criteria. And the exclusion criteria, that's another thing that people don't know. For exclusion criteria, they are not the direct opposite of the inclusion criteria. Let's go back to prisoners. We have said the inclusion criteria is prisoners aged 40 to 50. And then you will now say exclusion criteria, prisoners younger than 40 years. That is wrong. The exclusion criteria are a subset of the inclusion criteria. What do I mean by a subset of the inclusion criteria? Your study cohort is 40 to 50-year-old prisoners. And so within the 40 to 50-year-old, what are the things that can be present in the 40 to 50-year-old that will make you to exclude them from your research? That's the one That is what constitutes exclusion criteria. Not somebody who is 30. 30 is outside that cohort. 60, even 51 is outside that cohort. And so you look at your cohort and say, within this cohort, this thing that I want to try, I'm not sure if a pregnant woman will survive with you. So, okay, a pregnant woman age 40 to 50, she's a prisoner, but pregnant. Once she's pregnant, because of that pregnancy, we will exclude her. So please note, informed consent, justice, exclusion criteria, not the direct opposite of inclusion criteria. Rather, it is a subset of it. And when you are putting it together, the benefits and the risk of the research must be shared by both the researcher and the participants. Don't write still under justice. All the problems, all the risk, all the pains, all the inconveniences of the research should not be borne or must not be borne by the research participants. It should be shared between the researcher and the research participants. And then I think I have just one more slide left. Next slide, please. Yes. And so for this, for majority of us, you see that what I have talked about is bullet 1, which is informed consent, and bullet 2, research design and ethical review. Because by the time you put your proposal together, you must submit to a review board who will look at it and look at the science of the study, of what you want to do, and be sure it aligns with all the 4 principles. That is, I'm sure, is within those two issues that the bulk of us will fall into. However, a few of us may fall into category, the 3rd bullet or the 4th bullet. And so standard of care is for people who will do clinical trials or studies that are related to the hospital, patient management, and post-trial benefits. I gave an example earlier on, and I was talking about HIV or people who seroconvert in this process of volunteering or being enrolled as research participants. When you are putting it together, you must envision that some of them will seroconvert, and you ask yourself, after they have seroconverted, what benefits can I work into this? They must not seroconvert because they enrolled in your study and then you just leave them in the blues to sort themselves out. You should impute something into your proposal in terms of how they will access their drugs and every other thing. So let's restrict ourselves to those first 2. And if there is anybody who needs any additional information on what standard of care is or what exactly post-trial benefits entails, you can reach me through Mr. Dimeji. And with that, I think I have struggled hard within 45 minutes to talk about ethics. But let me say that each of these things that we have talked about is about 2-3 hours lecture on its own. But this is just to give us an idea of what we need or of the information we need to be able to write or put together a meaningful research proposal. Thank you very much. Over, Dimeji.
Thank you very much, Ma. This has been the most practical and easy to follow lecture on ethics that I have had. I want to believe there are people also who share this same bias with me. Thank you very much, man. This
Okay.
is very, very practical. And like I said, people, this is one of the lectures that you don't want to forget. You want to keep close to your chest because in research, every multinational, every development partner in Nigeria, any country you go to, this is a skill, this is a knowledge that you'll be asked if you know. It is a course on its own in Indiana University, Bloomington. So I want to say thank you very much, Ma, for for putting this together. And sincerely apologize for the mix-up in the links at the beginning of
No
the lecture.
problem. No
Thank you so
problem. No
much, Ma.
problem.
So
No
yeah, so
problem.
I want to quickly go to the questions.
Okay.
Uh yes, so Abidoye Anoluwa asks, please ma, I would love to
Okay.
ask if OAUTH has an electronic health record online database.
Not
So
to the
this
best
is
of not to the best of my knowledge. We are still, to a very large extent, we are still analog.
Okay, all right.
And
Thank you
I
very
want to
much.
believe that this person wants to conduct a study in the hospital. And so if this person is conducting a study in the hospital, if the person is conducting a study in the hospital, depending on if your supervisor has any link with the hospital, then you can process your ethical review in the hospital. If not, what you will need to do is process it on campus, and then you will now write the appropriate units in the hospital to apply for permission. What do I mean by that one? Assuming you want to use, you are working on patients with hypertension or whatever, that is in cardiology. You will need to go to the consultants. You go to the cardiology outpatient clinic, speak to the consultants, obtain their permission to say you want to recruit their patients as your study participants. Following that, you write a letter to medical records and they will endorse. And if that is it, to make it easier for you, if you are able to get one of those consultants as a research participant, as a supervisor, it will make the So back to what I was saying. So by the time you get to medical records, you present a letter that will be countersigned by that consultant to say that, yes, you are using their patients for your research and that they should please grant you permission to refer to their case notes. And so from time to time, they don't give more than 20 case notes at a time. That's the maximum they will give you. And so they'll give you 20 case notes. You extract whatever information you want to. And in extracting the information, that's one thing I didn't talk about. There's something we call privacy. Privacy either in recruitment of your participants, privacy in obtaining information from your participants. What privacy means, which I think I should differentiate now that I've remembered. There's a difference between confidentiality and privacy, even though people tend to use them, people think that they can be used interchangeably. Confidentiality means that whatever information I give you as a research participant should stay with you as much as possible, as long as it is not in, as long as another person's life is not at risk, then you keep it to yourself. What do I mean by that? Assuming that Mr. A is your client and Mr. A is HIV positive. We have said confidentiality. It means it should be between you and Mr. A, and Mr. A is HIV positive. However, Mr. A has a wife at home. You will try to reason with Mr. A that your wife needs to know so that she can take adequate precaution. And Mr. A refuses to disclose that to his wife. Because the wife's life is at risk, then you are covered to breach that confidentiality and break the news to the partner. You understand? Those are exceptional situations under which you are allowed to breach confidentiality. Otherwise, any information about your patient, about your client must remain with you till death. The other condition under which you can breach confidentiality is if they invite you to a court of law and they ask you to give evidence or to testify. You don't have a choice than to breach confidentiality. So that is confidentiality. But what is privacy? Privacy is about the research environment. It's about the research environment. Is that research environment private enough for your research participants to tell you the truth? As for example, let's take as simple as you want to know how many students are eating 3 square meals a day, and you just enter a class and you say, how many of you can afford to eat 3 square meals a day? I'm sure you know the answer. Virtually every hand will be up because nobody will want the other person to abuse him or to make fun of him. But if you engage them one-on-one, you create a room where the engagement is between you and the research participants. You'll be amazed as to the number of people who will own up to say that come. In fact, maybe it's even 101 or 001. So the privacy means the environment where you are obtaining your data or collecting your data, and it's private enough for you to get the truth. And the same thing goes with case notes, because that's what brought us there. If you are going to extract information from case notes, you just don't put them anywhere, because anybody may be passing at any time. You get a room that is dedicated, secluded. So once you enter that room and you lock it, it's only you and the case note. You extract whatever information you want to extract and you return that case note. So I hope I have been able to what now? I think I have been able to answer that person's question. The next one, please.
Yes, ma. You've even answered the next question in the process. So,
In the process. Thank you
yes, ma.
very much.
Yes,
So
ma.
that
So,
is what we
yeah,
do.
thank you. Thank you very much, ma. So, I have a question of my own, and that
Okay,
is,
let's hear you.
yes, ma.
Let's
So,
hear your question.
how do we balance research objective, balance the achieving the research objective on the field and getting people, persuading respondents or participants to participate in a survey. So I've had this experience where we go to the field, want to get people to talk, to interview, to participate in a survey, and they don't want to respond. But
Yeah.
then when they get a whiff that there could be an incentive,
So
even if it is
in essence,
300 naira, they
that
will
I
all
said
come.
it now. Everybody will
Yes.
come. Yeah,
So,
is the socioeconomic status of our country.
okay.
Is the
Okay.
socioeconomic, in here, anything that anybody is going to do, the first question is, what is in it for me? That's the unfortunate aspect. And whereas you go to developed countries, people advertise for research participants. They will tell you that per visit will pay $100. You understand? And people just walk by. They walk past and they ignore the adverts. But you can guess what will happen if in this country you put up, in fact, you don't even need to put up the advert. Just tell one or two people to say we are conducting a research and per visit we are paying $100. You can imagine what you will get. So that is it. It's difficult. It's difficult. But for those of you who go to the field, we are not too bothered, because what you are getting from them is not in any way therapeutic, is not invasive. You understand? They are not really questions that are likely to harm them. But we know that it is almost impossible to rule out this thing called undue inducement. And undue inducement, if their life is not threatened, they are not too bothered. But undue inducement is more important when it comes to therapeutic research, that you are testing a drug. Because you don't know how that drug will work. It may go either way. It may go either way. So we are more concerned. And when you submit a proposal on therapeutic research, as reviewers, we open our two eyes and we look at every dot, every comma. But when it comes to questionnaire studies, the best that you do is you just generate knowledge based on, you are looking, it's more of in-depth. In-depth is better than your questionnaire, but all of them, they are basically in the same regimen. Lives are not really at stake when it comes to those ones. But just to conclude, just to say that it is totally devoid of it. It is totally devoid, and it's the Nigerian syndrome. What is in it? You want my time, you want 10 minutes of my time. So what? At the end of it, what will you give me? So it's major. But as much as possible, it should not be the first thing. And when you have any form of compensation, it should be commensurate with what is being done. For example, you are recruiting participants from Ile-Ife. You don't need to pay 5,000 naira transport fare. 5,000 transport fare for research participants from Ife town to OAU as research participants is undue inducement. But if you say Sabo Lagere, the man is living in Lagere, Lagere to campus is maybe 300, the campus back to Lagere another 300, the man will take a bottle of Coke and this, and you pay 1,000 naira. You understand? That is how we work out all those things, although there are some other dimensions to it that I don't want to go. But for now, that's the way we have resolved it. And that is because the socioeconomic status of our land is so poor that any little thing like this constitutes undue inducement. So that is it.
Thank you very much, ma. This is the first
Okay.
time really I got a satisfactory response, because usually all of us, even the speaker, would end up saying, well, you see, this is the situation, and then there's nothing. We are not able to reach a compromise. But thank
A
you.
compromise.
Now I understand that once it does not
Okay.
affect life, then the
No,
significance is not so.
life is not affected.
All right.
Life is not
Thank
that.
you.
But assuming it's a vaccine that you are testing, for example,
Mm.
then we will open our eyes wide.
Thank you, ma. So there's a final
Okay,
question here.
no
So it
problem.
says, thank you for your presentation, ma. You talked about direct benefits to participants, ma. If, for
Okay. Yeah.
example, I am carrying out a research that requires only access to the patient's case notes and not direct contact with the patient,
Okay.
must I
Okay.
still include a direct benefit to the participant,
Okay. Okay.
or they can't be regarded as participants? That's the
Okay.
question.
Thank you very much. That's a very good one. Like I said, each of the things that we talked about within 45 minutes is a whole topic of 2-3 hours on its own. Now we are going into specifics. We are talking about, for us, such studies will be regarded as retrospective studies. In retrospective studies, you don't have direct contact with patients. So when they say contact with research participants, you will say no. And in that case, you cannot obtain informed consent because you are not liaising. So when you get to the column for informed consent, you just say waiver for informed consent required. I hope I have answered that person's question. You are working with inanimate objects. Case notes don't talk. They don't talk. So you cannot obtain informed consent. So once you are not obtaining informed consent, there is no direct benefit to the person. What you will have at the end of it all is, okay, the person said yes, ma. Okay, so that means the person is satisfied.
Thank you very much, Ma. This
My
is
pleasure.
this is this is really really exciting. Thank you, Ma. We really appreciate you. Please, everyone, let's use emojis. The
Uh,
clap emoji, and then we can just appreciate after session and thank you for this brilliantly put together and excellently delivered lecture. Thank you, Ma.
Thank you very much, everyone.
So everyone, yes, Ma. We've come to the end of today's program. Thank you so much for joining. Thank you to everyone who eventually joined. Uh, and those who had challenges with the link, we apologize. I think that will be fixed at our end against next week, against the next class. So thank you, Professor, for
Okay.
joining. We are grateful.
Thank you very much. It's my pleasure.
The director, University Research Office is here. You want to say a word of appreciation to Professor Fatusi?
Yeah, Professor Fatusi, good morning, ma. Thanks
Professor
for
Odu, good morning, sir.
good morning, ma.
Good morning,
Thanks
sir.
for the efforts
Thank God.
that you have put into this training this morning. We appreciate
It's
you.
okay. It's okay. My
Thank you,
pleasure.
ma. Yes,
Okay,
ma.
and
You're
let me also thank you too for attending our faculty conference. Thank you, sir.
welcome. You're welcome, ma. My pleasure.
Oh,
It was
okay.
my
No,
pleasure.
it was not. No, it wasn't the executive director that attended
It
our
was the vice chancellor
conference. It
that
was the
attended.
VC. It was the VC that attended.
Yes, ma.
Okay, thank you.
Okay,
Thank you very
ma. Have a
much.
nice day,
Okay,
ma.
and you
All
too.
right.
God bless you all. Bye.
Yes, ma.
So thank you very much. So on behalf of all the directors at the Central Office of Research and the Executive Director of the Central Office of Research and the person of Professor Murenike Ukmang, I want to say thank you to everyone for coming. We hope to be able to meet together again next week. Thank you and bye-bye.